Robert Estienne wrote Thesaurus Linguae Latinae in 1531, which is considered the foundation of modern Latin lexicography. In the first editions, Scandinavia is said to be an island in the Sea of Pontus, citing Pliny. And this passage does, in actual fact, name the sea Codanian and not Pontus, why this passage was later corrected in this work of Robert Estienne. But what if deeming it a mistake is the mistake? What if this, in fact, is not just a one-off mistake, but a remnant of a long-lost fact, that this sea was once called Pontus? Plato did, after all, state that Atlantis' inner sea was the real Pontus. What if this island of Scandinavia in Pontus is, in actual fact, the real Atlantis? If you ask Olof Rudbeck, that is exactly what this mistake is evidence of, who wrote the 2,200-page work called Atland or Manheim. I've studied it for nearly 2,000 hours at this point, held several presentations, and am preparing a translation of this work for you to get access to this work as well. So if you're new here, get ready for some, at least at first glance, even for those who are versed in Atlantis theories, unconventional takes on the Atlantis account, and therefore to also not have all your questions answered right away, as this is a paradigm shift in thinking. In this episode, I will answer what might be the most pertinent question: how Atlantis can be a peninsula, and the Scandinavian one precisely. So the first answer to that question is actually quite simple, because Scandinavia was thought to be an island in antiquity. For instance, we have Jordanes, who said that the Goths and the Scythians are from the Arctic island of Skansa. Pliny, who we just mentioned, the many islands in the Codanian. We have Ptolemy, who made one of the most influential maps in history with his Geographica. He had Scandinavia as an island, a small island. Contemporaneously, there was Pomponius Mela, who also had the Scandinavian area rendered as many islands, mirroring this description of Pliny, who also said that the Baltic Sea was many islands. So with this knowledge that Scandinavia was in actual fact seen as an island in antiquity, let's look at what Plato actually says about this place. He says that it was possible for the travelers of that time to cross from Atlantis to the other islands, and from the islands to the whole of the continent over against them, which encompasses that veritable Pontus. So veritable is the key word here. It means the actual, real, genuine, legit, real, true, the original Pontus, right? I've put Pontus in brackets because in the modern translations it says the veritable sea, but the word used in Greek is Pontus, and it has a different connotation than the word Pelagos, which is more like ocean instead of sea. And the continent encompasses this sea of Pontus. The continuation shows how this is a bay with an open ocean on the other side. So it continues directly after, for all that we have here, namely in Pontus, lying within the mouth of which we speak, is evidently a haven, having a narrow entrance, but that beyond is real ocean, and here it uses the word Pelagos instead of Pontus. And the land surrounding it may most rightly be called, in the fullest and true sense, a continent. So that is the continent encompassing the Pontus, right? Haven is a retreat, sanctuary, shelter, a sheltered sea, right? So it could either be a sheltered sea or even a bay, right? Let's look how this would all make sense in the Scandinavian area. It was possible for the travelers of that time to cross from Atlantis to the other islands, and from the other islands to the whole of the continent over against them, which encompasses that veritable Pontus. And as you can see here, the continent encompasses Pontus, if botten is Pontus. And then he continues, for all that we have here in Pontus, lying within the mouth of which we speak, which would then be the Pillars of Hercules here, is a haven. So the haven is Pontus, having a narrow entrance, but that yonder is real ocean. So here is the open ocean, the Pelagos. And the land surrounding it may most rightly be called in the truest and fullest and true sense a continent. So this is in the fullest and true sense a continent, right? And Pontus, as I said, mostly means like a more specific or enclosed sea, inland, while Pelagos is more a general term for ocean, open ocean, in a more general sense. That's why the Pontus could actually be this name Pontus instead of just a general name for the sea. So if the correct Pontus is the Bay of Scandinavia, its rightful name is indeed Bothnia, the endonym being botten, but the Greeks turn into pont for easier pronunciation. It rolls better on the tongue. And then in their usual fashion added the suffix of os, so that it became Pontos. Let's continue with the question. So why does Plato call it an island if this is indeed a peninsula? Therefore, we will look at the Greek word he uses, which is nisos, which means island. But it can be applied to peninsulas, as in Peloponnesus, which means Pelops island, but is in actual fact a peninsula. Rudbeck, he connects the word nisos to the Swedish word näs. And näs in Swedish means peninsula or isthmus. And there is actually a very strong connection with this word to the Indo-European root for the word nisos, which we will see here in just a minute. So näs is the root word from where you have words like nest. It's like a smaller thing connected to a larger whole or something protruding, right? The nest protrudes from wherever it is built upon. And the proto-names of this word nest is nisda and nisdo. So here you see that this is actually quite similar to the word nisos. As far as I've understood it, modern etymologists do not make this connection. They believe it is a coincidence, this similar sounding words, that they do not have an etymological connection. We even have the Sanskrit word nida, which means nest. So as you can see, this is a spreading over all of the Indo-European languages, this word. In Swedish, we have näsa. From näs, it became näsa. And näs is something protruding. It's like a peninsula or a nest, a smaller thing connected to a larger whole or something protruding. And the very interesting thing, why I believe that all of these words actually are etymologically connected, is because the word nisos and its etymology is first of all uncertain. It has traditionally been connected to the word nicho, swim, from the Proto-Indo-European sneh, to flow or to swim. But then they theorize that if its meaning, island, has developed from a more original meaning of headland and cape, it may be like the Proto-Germanic word nasja, foothill, headland, cape. So this is very similar to the Swedish word for nose, näsa, which means nose or a cape, foothill and headland. You also have the Bulgarian word nos, which means nose, cape, promontory. So these are the same words, right? a derivation from the Proto-Indo-European word nes. I mean, come on, this is the same word as the Swedish nas. This is the word nas. Isn't it quite obvious that nisos comes from the word promontory? It's quite obvious, isn't it? And Rudbeck proposes that it's actually the Swedish word nas, which is the root. And today, the Proto-Indo-European version is nes, which is very similar, right? So I actually believe that this connection is quite strong. There's quite a good reason to believe that nisos, in actual fact, means peninsula in the beginning. And since we are discussing Atlantis in these proto-times, basically, maybe it's not as weird to assume that Plato used the word in this proto-form. Another connection is, of course, that the Greeks are Scythians in their mythology. And we've gone over several times how the Scythians are connected to the Baltic area, seeming that they are from there in the first place, before they came to the Black Sea area. And Archaeologos, I uploaded his video where he discusses the Gothic and Scythian connection, where he also describes how they are very much so connected to the Greeks, that the Greeks are in actual fact Scythians in the beginning. So I'm just going to put this in here because this is very important to connect the word. If this is true, and that the Scythians are Swedish, if that is also true, then we have the historic connections for why nas became the Greek word nisos. So here's the clip.
This leads us nicely into a discussion of the powerful connection between the most ancient Greece and Scythia. Again and again, we find evidence of the Scythian and Goth being a seed or feeder people, whose ancient expatriates seemed to travel and settle far and wide. India, Persia, the Levant, and Greece. And let's not forget or discount, in the one surviving Gothic history we do have, they clearly mention pushing all the way to the borders of Egypt, into Media and Persia and beyond. Should we pretend these stray lines are just outright lies? And if so, for what purpose? And with regard to Greece, I've mentioned in the past that ancient histories speak of the Pelasgi as being the earliest recorded population. But it's always been a bit of a mystery as to who exactly these Pelasgi were, and where they came from. Pinkerton clearly believes their heritage to be Scythian, and states, quote, "The Pelasgi, or Hellenes or Greeks, were Scythians of Thrace." This plain sense might argue at once, because the Greeks were everywhere surrounded by Scythia and the sea, and no other nation was near them. This may be shown from different arguments, though the Greek writers have shaded the subject much by the foolish desire of making their nation aboriginal, or sprung from the ground on which they lived. Trogus Pompeius says expressly that the people of Macedon were anciently called Pelasgi. Strabo says that the Thracians under Eumolpus colonized Attica, and Herodotus calls these Thracians Pelasgi, as above shown. Plutarch says, "The Pelasgi, as they say, roving over the greatest part of the world, and having subdued the inhabitants, reside in the country which they had conquered." This can only refer to the Scythii. Pausanias shows the oracle at Delphi to have been founded by the Scythii Hyperboreae. The Greeks had admitted such refinement as almost to pass for another people among their own progenitors, a case which may even happen in ruder nations, as we know that the Danes, who came to Northumberland in the 9th century, were regarded as utter strangers and enemies by their own countrymen, the Angli. And once more, by Pinkerton, quote, "The Hellenes were Scythii. Even mythology might persuade this, for it is well known that Hellen, reputed father of the Hellenic name, was the son of Deucalion, and Lucian says expressly that Deucalion was a Scythian, quote, "Deucalion the Scythian, in whose time happened the great flood." Deucalion was the son of Prometheus. Prometheus was the king of the Scythii. And it might be shown that the Greek mythology is but an improvement of the Scythic, the gods being most illustrious princes of the first Scythic empire, who were deified by their subjects. a custom continued to a late period among the Goths. Many ideas of Greek mythology may also be found in the Gothic, but this ground must not be lightly trodden, and is left to him who can employ a large work upon it.
Rudbeck certainly made a large work upon it, with his 2,200 pages before passing, where he connected the Greek gods to Scandinavia, the home of the Goths, according to the most extensive Gothicist work of Jordanes, and others before him under the Scythian name, as I discussed in my first video. So let's go over this. Nisos is also applied to peninsulas. It is secondarily speculated to come from cape, nose, and bridge. And the word nest, which is not said to be etymologically connected, has similar sounding proto-roots. The Greeks are Scythian in mythology, and we have argued that the Scythians are from the Nordic areas in the very first beginning. Where nas means cape, nose, nest, and land bridge. So nas might very well have become nis, and then they added their usual suffix os. With this new understanding, let's look at Plato's text again, and we will see how it is actually quite feasible that he is actually describing the geography of a peninsula. We went over in the last presentation on the size of Atlantis how the dimensions of the plain are in actual fact the height of the whole island. We went over how the word but means that it shifts focus from the plain to the island. And then that the overside is 3,000 stadia and then the underside is 2,000 stadia. And he also says just that the underside is reckoned from the sea, meaning that the top side is not. And if just one side is sea and the other is not, it means that the other side is connected to the mainland, right? Or is not sea, at least. And this is true if you look at Scandinavia, of course. The overside, or the top side, is the land side. Why it would make sense that he only mentions from the sea, talking about the side below. Another interesting thing is that this ratio, 3,000 stadia on top and 2,000 stadia downwards from the plain, would on Scandinavia mean that this is Uppsala, and the percentages are the top part is 60% and the bottom part is 40%. And the real dimensions of Scandinavia is like this, that the top side above Uppsala is 56.7% and the bottom side is 43.3%. So it is 3.3 percentage points off. So could this be close enough to demonstrate that this is a mirroring relational proportion? In my view, it is quite feasible because he, of course, uses rounded numbers in the thousands. So, of course, there should be some kind of wiggle room, and that the main point is this relational proportion of the top side and the underside. So that would then mean that Uppsala is the plain and the capital. And if you are from Sweden, you know that Uppsala is known for its plains. It is very flat compared to the rest of Scandinavia. According to Wikipedia, situated on the fertile Uppsala flatlands of muddy soil. And Uppsala was, of course, a pagan religious capital, at least around the Viking Age, 1000 CE. So with the theory Rudbeck works under, this place is actually much, much older than we believe today. I went over how the 5,000 stadia just doesn't really measure up to the size of the Scandinavian peninsula, right? It's about 2 degrees too short. What is interesting is, of course, that Eratosthenes used the 5,000 as a base when he calculated the size of the Earth. And the distance he used was the length of Egypt, basically. So right beside Libya, which is compared to the size of Atlantis in Plato's account, right? So what I believe happened is that the 5,000 stadia unit was gathered from the smaller Libya, the Atlanteans who lived in North Africa. They were the Berbers, who were of course very close to Egypt, where Eratosthenes did the measurements. And as Plato says, their lands were a bit smaller, but comparable to Atlantis. Was therefore this land of Libya and Egypt, this measurement conceptually applied to Atlantis, since these two places are supposed to have been comparable? This would explain why the 5,000 stadia is technically a bit too short. Specifically as short as Libya is smaller, right? About 1.5 or 2 degrees. The Greeks and Latins' knowledge about Atlantis were influenced and tainted by their proximity to these areas. This is a point that we will go over once in this presentation, and is something you will see throughout this work when I present the evidence for why so many of the place names are in actual fact Scandinavia, including the Libyans, the Moors, and the Hesperides, and the Atlas Mountains. All of these are, by the Latins and the Greeks, mistakenly applied to the Mediterranean area because of this, that they were much closer to these areas. They are from this area. So, speaking about the Atlas Mountains, we have Maximus of Tyre. He described the land of the Hesperides, the daughters of Atlas, 200 AD. He said that the Hesperian Libyans inhabit a land long and narrow, on all sides surrounded by sea, for the external sea being divided about the summit of this neck embraces the land with numerous and marine billows. So this is the archipelago. To these men, Atlas is a temple and statue. So it's a land that is narrow and long, with sea on all sides. Sounds very much like a peninsula, right? And of course you have the golden apples, which is Idun's apples. And then he continues that Atlas is a hollow mountain of a great altitude, open to the sea like theaters to the air. So if this is Scandinavia, this is of course then the theater, the hook of the Scandinavian mountains. Theaters in ancient times had this oval shape, right? This bent shape. And now we are placing the Atlas Mountains in the far north, right? But shouldn't the Atlas Mountains be in North Africa? So let's look at some of the sources and how they describe the Atlas Mountains. First we have Hesiod in Theogony. This is 700 BC, so this is a very old source. He describes the Atlas Mountains in the underworld, that of Tartarus, and that Atlas is the son of Iapetus, which we said many scholars just a few hundred years ago, of course, connected to Japheth, because it's quite obvious that Iapetus is Japheth. So Japheth's son Atlas of the underworld. He says that, and there, all in their order, are the sources and ends of gloomy earth and misty Tartarus. This is the end of the earth. And the unfruitful sea and starry heaven, loathsome and dank, which even the gods abhor. It is a great gulf, and if once a man were within the gates, he would not reach the floor until a whole year had reached its end. But cruel blasts upon blast would carry him this way and that. And this marvel is awful even to the deathless gods. So being thrown about in this gulf is, in Rudbeck's opinion, the maelstrom. He also interprets this text a little bit differently. I will go over that sometime in the future, how he interprets this text. And of course we, in the Bok Saga, have maelstroms or whirlpools in Finland also, in this gulf being spoken about here, which we theorize then is the Gulf of Bothnia. Bothnia means botten, or the bottom, the underworld maybe. There stands the awful home of the murky night, wrapped in dark clouds. In front of it, the son of Iapetus, Atlas that is, stands immovably upholding the wide heaven upon his head. So the Atlas Mountains are part of this underworld, right? We continue with Virgil, who wrote Aeneid, in this period. He also had snowy Atlas mountains in Tartarus. Now, in his flight, he saw the steep flanks and summit of strong Atlas, who holds the heavens on his head. Atlas, whose pine-covered crown is always wreathed in dark clouds and lashed upon the wind and rain. Fallen snow cones his shoulders, while rivers fall from his ancient chin and his rough beard bristles with ice. Does this sound like North Africa to you? Caelius Italicus wrote Punica in the 1st century CE. Atlas, who would bring down the sky if he withdrew his shoulders. His cloud-capped head supports the stars, and his soaring neck forever holds aloft the firmament of heaven. His beard is white with frost, and pine forests crown his brow with their vast shade. Winds ravage his hollow temples, and foaming rivers rush down from his steaming open jaws. Moreover, the deep seas assail the cliffs on both his flanks, and when the weary Titan has bathed his panting steeds, hide his flaming car in the steaming ocean. So this is the Phaeton myth, the sun crashing or landing in the ocean. And this happens in the Atlas Mountain regions, which is either North Africa or these more farther, more northern areas, the edge of the world or the darkest places of the world. Euripides, he states in Heracles 400 BC, so this is also one of the oldest sources. Were I but young and still a man of my hands, I would have seized my spear and dabbled those flaxen locks of his with blood, so that the coward would now be flying from my prowess beyond the bounds of Atlas. So here is a rhetorical question. Where would you want to send your enemy? To the temperate climate of the North African mountains, where there are pomegranates and so forth, or to the gloomy, dark and snowy underworld at the ends of the earth, which even the gods abhorred? We will see how the Atlas Mountains belongs to this northern Scandinavian area even more when we speak about Idun's apples and their connections to Hercules and his mission of gathering the apples from the Hesperides in Hyperborea. Plato, going back to Plato, he writes, first then, the whole region was said to be exceedingly lofty and precipitous towards the sea. So this passage is gathered from the Henry Davis literal translation of 1850, because it is a little bit more clear than the modern translation. So it says that it is the most lofty against the sea. And again, it is described as towards the sea, meaning that the other side is not towards the sea, indicating that this is not strictly an island, right? That this is a peninsula, with one side being towards the mainland, which is this side, of course. That would mean that these are the mountains, maybe the Atlas Mountains, since Plato is describing Atlas Island, right? And that would then mean that the Atlas Mountains are in the underworld, meaning that these areas are the underworld. And we've gone over how the Cimmerians are from Scandinavia. Plutarch writes in Marius that the Cimmerians passed from the Meotic Lake into Asia, and this "from the" is added. It merely says that the Cimmerians passed Meotic Lake into Asia. Most lived at the confines of the earth, along the outer sea, which was shaded, wooded, and wholly sunless. Day and night divide the year into equal parts, of advantage to Homer and his Odysseus, consulting the shades of the dead. We also went over the Orphic Argonautica. They passed by the Cronian Sea, and then it says that they, pulling the ship, we came to the Cimmerians with no sun. The Riphaean Mountains and the Calpius block it. We've gone over how the Riphaean Mountains are the end of the hook on the eastern side, And the Calpius would then, by logic, be the other side. The gulf where the sun crashed in Tartarus means bottom. And in the Nordic mythology, we of course have hell, or as I like to say, heel, the bottom of the foot, right? Old Norse for Bothnia is Helsingabotten. So hell, heel, bottom, and sing is like a suffix meaning to be of something. So a helsing is like being of hell or of botten. The English word north, its Proto-Indo-European form, is today suggested to be ner, which they say mean west or below. And again, the Proto-Indo-European form ner is here even exactly the same word as the Swedish word. Ner means below in Scandinavian or in Swedish. In Finnish, Bothnia is Pohjanmaa, and Pohja means both bottom and north. You may very well know that the Atlas Mountains is most famously in North Africa, but you see a glimpse here, and it will be further demonstrated that the Greeks and the Latins had a hard time knowing what piece of Atlantic information belonged to the Mediterranean area and what belonged to the north. Another good example of this is from Pausanias in Descriptions of Greece from 100 AD. White wild boars and Thracian white bears have been known to be acquired by private individuals. So he connects Thrace with white animals, which of course is more of a Arctic phenomenon. And a little bit later he states that white hares are bred in Libya. So could Libya in the most ancient times have been here in the Arctic regions of Scandinavia? So this is all I have for today. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you to SlidesGo for this beautiful presentation template. And I will see you in a few days. So have a good one until then.